1992. Yeah. Now, this is clear later. This is clear to the influence of this attitude of Catholics, especially Mediterranean Catholicism, identifying with the interests, as you have mentioned, with Christian Palestinians and Christian minorities in the Arab world, in Syria, in Iraq, especially in the Lebanon, of course. And now, I cannot say if this is the case, but it's an interesting, I would say, perspective as a result of the emigration of Christians, especially from the Palestine territories, but also from the Lebanon. There's a strong Lebanese Christian minority in the United States, for instance, second generation now. This means that the Arab countries become more and more homogeneous Muslim. This interest of the Catholic Church, of the Vatican, will become less and less, and this would be, yes, I cannot have no proof that this is the case, but it's an interesting expectation. You have an interesting case in the Mosque of Nazareth, which was, I think, in the Israeli politics an important aspect, about 2 years ago or so. Yeah. Yes. Now, when, I hope I am informed correctly, but at the end, the government of Israel decided in favor of building the mosque. No, not? Okay. So, but this was due to the lobbying of the Vatican. So it was an interest that the Vatican on the one side, Muslim Palestinian interest on the other side, and the state of Israel between. Now this is a new arrangement of conflicts, and this could also be the result of this development. How do Catholics in Austria feel about it? I think the main factor is really education. I think if you discuss aspects of the Middle East within a group of Catholic university students, you would find in principle a very pro-Israel attitude. Not uncritical of certain aspects of Israel policy, but in principle, I would say almost no one would deny the right of existence to the state of Israel. Now, educated, higher educated Catholics, I think, are in principle a rather pro-Israeli, Jewish-friendly group in Austria and maybe also in Germany. It's, I think, rather different in other European countries. Now, about Lueger. Well, yes, Lueger is, of course, because Lueger is the founder of a movement which is in the roots of the Austrian People's Party, of political Catholicism, of the Austrian leading governing party of today, the Austrian Conservatives. And just to give you a part of the complexity, Lueger was an anti-Semite, everybody knows about it. And one of his most important followers was Leopold Kunczak. And Leopold Kunczak was at the same time an outspoken anti-Nazi and an outspoken anti-Semite. Now, as a Lueger movement stands for a tradition of anti-Nazism and anti-Semitism at the same time. Now, this is a big difference to the Schönerer tradition, because the Schönerer tradition is a tradition which led to the Austrian Nazi Party. So Schönerer's tradition means pro-Nazi sentiments and anti-Semitism. Lueger's tradition means anti-Nazi sentiments and anti-Semitic sentiments also. And of course, you can justify, not me, but you can justify that Vienna has its Lueger Ring, which is the address of the University of Vienna, by the way, and its huge Lueger monument, due to this anti-Nazi roots. And for that reason, just am reminded of a remark by Ariel Musikant, the head of the Jewish community in Vienna. He said, well, to start a discussion about the Lueger monument, this is just above our heads. It's too heavy. This cannot be done. It's not realistic. You can criticize intellectually, academically Lueger's role, but politically at the moment, in the foreseeable future, this is not possible to think that the Lueger monument will be discussed. Wartime now. How did the Austrians react? First, of course, even it's a small country, there are no Austrians but Austrians and Austrians. Of course, there was a generation cleavage, younger Austrians versus older Austrians, and there is still important the education cleavage, better educated Austrians and not so good educated Austrians. The wartime case is responsible for a polarization in the Austrian attitudes towards the Nazi past. We have a much more critical attitude, especially in academia, towards the Nazi past, and what we call the quality press, again, education, with respect to Austria's responsibility. And you have a tendency, let's forget about it, we shouldn't discuss about it, this is so long in the past. On the other side, this polarization, of course, has a lot to do with this generation conflict, and I know you know the name Zikrovsky.
Yeah.
Zikrovsky published a book
Haider's Phenomenon.
About Wolfgang Neugebauer and the documentary archives of the Austrian resistance, and he argued Neugebauer is so strongly anti-Nazi because his father was a Nazi. But at the same time, if someone argues Haider is Haider because his father was also a Nazi, this is not permitted. So you can use the argument that you are a second generation after Nazi parents in both ways. You can argue Haider got his worldview from a very active Nazi father, Nazi mother, and you can also argue, I think, as Zikrovsky did, that you are an ardent anti-Nazi because your father is a Nazi. So this argument is intellectually just not sound enough. It cannot be used in both ways. But in singular cases, it's very important. You have to face the question, what did your parents, or now your grandparents, do between 1938 and 1945? Now, Kreisky, I would say the most consistent picture we have of Bruno Kreisky's role today is with respect to his own Jewish identity. In one respect, he acted out of his complex identity in a not legitimate way. This is with respect to his dealing with Simon Wiesenthal. Now this is, I think, almost everybody in Austria who did some analysis about Wiesenthal's treatment by Kreisky. This is just beyond any limits of fairness how Kreisky treated Simon Wiesenthal, especially in 1975 when he defended Friedrich Peter, chairman of the Freedom Party, as SS officer against Wiesenthal. Now this is more or less accepted now in Austria, even within the Social Democratic. The PLO connection is a rather different case, because some argue, and I would say this is more or less almost the mainstream in Austria, that by giving, together with Willy Brandt and Olof Palme, Arafat respectability, this was part of a trend which led to Sadat's visit to Israel in 1976, and of course to the Oslo Agreement. Whatever the positive or not so positive consequences of those two steps were, it has a lot to do with Kreisky's policy. So Kreisky opens the doors which were used later on even by the United States government. So this kind of policy, of course, I know in the 1970s it was very much against the American interest, especially in the Ford presidency. It changed a little bit in the Carter presidency when Carter strongly backed Sadat and his policy. And I know Sadat is not Arafat and Arafat is not Sadat, but nevertheless to bring a certain kind of flexibility by even discussing taboos. So his Arafat policy today is seen in principle legitimate, differently from his Wiesenthal attitude, but both have a lot to do with his Jewish identity. And of course, it was quite obvious that Kreisky saw himself, I can do this and invite Arafat to Vienna because I am of Jewish origin, because I cannot be attacked of being anti-Semitic. This was, of course, his main calculation. He is a Jewish, non-Zionist, maybe even anti-Zionist, but Jewish socialist. He can do it. He can break the taboo.
Okay, second round, thank you. Yosef Hakimian first, Ambassador Bovrin, Dr. Zul. Yosef?
Yes, you have described the attitude of Austria. It's a very large center there of the Iranian Jews who escaped from Iran, managed by Hayes, and you know, the Austrian government gives them all the help and support that they can. I like your comment on that. And also another point, and this is not, I know this is not the topic of discussion, but I believe that the change in attitude in India toward Israel has been because House of Nehru is no longer there. Because Nehru saw himself as sort of the messiah of the third world, and there were 22 Arab states, and who was supporting Israel. I believe that is what dictated his attitude, rather than the current government being, you know, swayed by Islamic fanatics in Kashmir or Pakistan or Bangladesh. Thank you.
Hussein?
As Professor Pelinka, I would join all the my predecessors in thanking you very much for your very interesting and instructive presentation. I have two very small comments and two questions. You mentioned two episodes, so-called episodes by Haider when he referred to the Nazi past. And if I'm not mistaken, he also called in the Austrian parliament the extermination camps as labor camps. And
Penal camps.
penal camps.
Straflager.
And this rose, I think, a very strong reaction. About Kreisky, I think that he granted recognition to Arafat before he asked Arafat to abandon the Palestinian covenant. And this, I think, was a very important turn in giving that recognition to the PLO and Arafat. Now, two questions about what is the, of course, you mentioned that how to, the educational field. And we know that you can combat anti-Semitism by two means, educational means and by the legal means. My question is, what is in the legal field Austria doing in order to fight or combat anti-Semitism? And are there any other personalities or movements, ideological streams that are trying to also to join in combating anti-Semitism? It brings me also to the question of how does the present historiography deal with the subject of anti-Semitism and also with the subject of Holocaust. Referring to the educational aspect, the question is how well are the teachers, particular teachers of history, trained in order to present this subject to the classes. I remember I had a episode when I was in Austria. I used to go to those classes who made projects on the Holocaust. And on one of the occasions I asked, I just wanted to know what the pupils or what the students have learned from their projects. And on one of the occasions I asked them a question, how would they explain the fact that the Holocaust took place in countries like Germany and Austria. They were very highly cultured nations. And the answer was, I'm mentioning it was a project done over a year, and the answer was, well, all the Jews at that time were rich and all the Austrians were poor.
Which age group?
I hope it's the only one.
Which age group was it?
It was the last. They were nearly 18 years, and they went to Mauthausen, they went to others, and it was also in the presence of the director of the education department of the municipality. Thank you very much.
And last one in this round, Efraim.
Thank you very much for the lecture. I think you very correctly pointed out the change in the Austrian attitude towards Austrian history during the Holocaust, which started with Chancellor Vranitzky and the change in terms of Austria previously seeing itself as a victim and eventually understanding that they were part of the problem. But as a result of that, there's been a lot of progress in several areas, several practical issues that relate to the Holocaust, such as in education, in commemoration, and in restitution. But there's one area where there's been absolutely no progress, and that has been in terms of the prosecution of Holocaust perpetrators. And 4 months ago, I met with Justice Minister Gastinger, who was then Justice Minister, and it's clear, first of all, that the way in which Austrian laws have been, the legal system has developed over the years, it's almost impossible to prosecute Nazi war criminals in Austria. And there's no question that there's, I think, a lot of political opposition to the efforts to bring these people to justice. And there are specific cases currently pending in Vienna in which no progress is being made, and it's clear that the obstacle is political. So my question to you is, why has this been the case? Is it because recent justice ministers have been from the Freedom Party, or you have some other response or reaction to that?
Okay.
Yeah.
About the Austrian government's response, as a result of the wartime debate, the Austrian government started to deal with the aspects of restitution. 1995, the Grand Coalition under Vranitzky and at that time Busek, who soon was replaced by Schüssel, passed a bill about the so-called national funds, which was a kind of symbolic payment to those who had been driven into exile in 1938. It was not a restitution, but it was a beginning. Now, interestingly enough, after 2000, Schüssel established his coalition cabinet with the Freedom Party. The restitution aspect became now dealt with, and you, I think, are informed that in a certain aspect, a rather not completely satisfying, but rather fair agreement has been passed. And I think the main reason is that Schüssel knew that he, now with the burden of an extreme right-wing party in his coalition, had to fight the negative images of that coalition. In that respect, the Freedom Party had a positive impact on the restitution question. Just one final remark about India. Of course, it's not only the end of the House of Nehru. You can argue Sonia Gandhi is still again in power, but the end of the Soviet Union. Now, the India's perspective changed dramatically with the end of the Soviet Union. And the intention of the BJP as well as the Congress party is very much to find a global agreement with the United States, and India realizes this would also imply satisfying friendly relations with the State of Israel. So it's a pro-American attitude which leads to a much better agreement and much better relationship with Israel. Now, to put off the Gofrin, yes, Haider in 1995, when in Oberwart, in a settlement which was populated by Roma, a bomb killed 4 Roma with a clearly racist sign at the site. Roma back to India. So it was a learned right-wing terrorist. He learned that the Roma came from India centuries ago. And after this tragic episode, there was a special debate in the Austrian Parliament, and then Haider said, well, it's especially tragic now, more or less in that sense, that this was directed against those who were put into penal camps and not exterminations. So of course, this is, I think this also indicates, this was not intended, this is his way of thinking. Even if he talks about victims of the Nazis, he hesitates to speak out that the gypsies were exterminated in Auschwitz, besides the Jews. This is a very tragic story you told about an 18 years old who is full of anti-Jewish stereotypes even after having this special class about the Holocaust. Now, maybe I'm too optimistic, but I would say, without this special education, you would find much more 18 years old high school students with such an attitude. So this was not because of, but in spite of this special information he got by visiting Mauthausen and by having these classes. Because all the data indicate, you have of course young academics who are anti-Semitic, but you have much lesser than among the same age group without higher education. So it's not the recipe to get rid of anti-Semitism, but it helps step by step. And this is, of course, a very long process we have to face, and at the end there will be not no anti-Semitism, but lesser anti-Semitism. That's all we can hope for, realistically. Now, legally, the Austrian government and the Austrian system is one, on paper at least, one of the most outspoken anti-Semitic systems. If you defend the Nazi regime, this is a crime. And it is now punished. It's easy to punish a young defender of the Nazi regime than a Holocaust perpetrator. It's much easier in Austria. It's interesting, much easier. And if you induce hatred against certain beliefs, nationalities, ethnic groups, and this includes also Jews, of course, but also Roma, whatever. This is also a crime, and it is sometimes punished by Austrian courts. So hardcore right-wing Nazi attitudes are now quite successful.